Good evening, everyone. This is Dolores Cannon with the Metaphysical Hour. This is June the 29th in the year 2012. We're already halfway through the year, and I don't know where it went. But
I guess tomorrow. I guess that would be the middle point.
That's the last day of June, tomorrow. So we're still doing live shows. We'll continue for a few more weeks, and then, we're going to go overseas. All right. Tonight, I'm still interviewing the speakers and the authors that we're going to have at our conference. And our conference is coming up very soon now. And it's going to be July the 13th to the 15th in Rogers, Arkansas, at the John Q. Hammond Center, which is the biggest venue in Arkansas. And this is our 7th conference. And each year it gets bigger and better, and we have a lot more authors and a lot more speakers. And, we started 7 years ago. It was a showcase for our authors, and that's what it's continued to be. We're going to talk for a little bit because they're trying to get our guest online. He is in England, and, of course, there it's the middle of the night. I hope he didn't go to sleep on it. But he's speaking at a conference there, and this is the number they gave us, so they're trying to locate him. So when he comes on, the person that takes care of the radio show will interrupt and tell us he's there. So that's when we're waiting for him to come online. All right. So anyway, with our conference, there's always changes are taking place, and you know that our main keynote is going to be Arun Gandhi, and we're going to be talking to him next week. He'll be our last guest we're going to have on the air before we do our conference. And there are many other speakers that we've been having on for the last month, one after the other, that have been really important speakers. But now we have another one that's coming in and taking the place of one of the speakers that can't be there. And we won't have time to get her on the show, but you have heard her many, many times. Dee Wallace is going to be at the conference giving a special guest appearance. And this is going to be really exciting because, she is a firecracker. She is so full of energy, and she just explodes off the stage. And she has such valuable information. And last month in May is when we did a 2-day seminar in L.A. together. So she's agreed to come on, and she's going to be doing a special guest appearance on Saturday, which is going 3 days, and it's going to go, from 8 in the morning or 9 in the morning until 8 or 9 at night. So we're going to have constant speakers all day long. And if you know from the show, you've got an idea of the wonderful wealth of information that we're going to have and going to be able to present. Well, I'm going to give out the toll-free number that anyone can call in if they want to talk to our guest. Really, we're trying to focus on him. But this number is good all over the world. 1-888-627-6008. 1-888-627-6008. And we usually try to focus on our speaker. I guess I could go ahead and introduce him before he does hook up on the line. I just hope he didn't fall asleep on us. All right. But right when we were coming on, getting ready to go on the air, we have deer walking around in our front yard out here. Because, I live on top of the mountain in the middle of nowhere, and they're really beautiful to see. But right now, we are just burning up here with the heat. This whole area of the country, it's just record-breaking heat, over 100 degrees. And we're not used to this. And the grass, the trees, everything is being burned up. At least the deer look like they're finding something to eat out there. Yeah. But it's not as bad as Colorado, where everything is really burning up out there. Okay. So I guess I'll tell you a little bit about Guy before he comes on. Our guest is going to be Guy Needler, and he's one of our authors, and we are just now publishing his second book. The first book was The History of God, and he lives in England, and he just forwards the manuscript just like everybody else does, and we get hundreds and hundreds of manuscripts that I read, and then we decide which one we're going to print. He had a very different idea and a very different way of approaching it. When he comes on, I'm going to have him give his background, but he's an engineer, isn't he? Yeah, Julia's here. He's an engineer, so he was very practical, and you would think left brain, but he always had this in the back of his mind. It was, what did he say, about the psychic abilities or the interest? The interest in that all his life, but he had just not explored it because he was doing like everybody else, just having a job and married and children and just living a day-to-day life. But then he got into metaphysics and a whole new world opened up to him. But I'm going to let him explain how it all happened. But he was able to get fantastic information, and people think that my Convoluted Universe books are mind-bending. Mm-hmm. Guy's are really mind-bending.
What I have said is your books are the deep end of the pool. His are the ocean.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, you want deep. There you go. I didn't think you could get deeper than your material.
But it's not for the ones that are just starting out, I don't believe, because it might be a little too much for them to handle all at one time.
It's not for the faint of heart, is that
Yeah, not for the faint of heart. But when you first get into it, like mine, I try to write it in a simple way, and he has done the same thing. He's here? Okay, good. I'm going to let him tell his story. Guy, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Dolores. Good evening to you. Sorry for the technical error.
Did we wake you up or what?
Oh, no. The phone number that we're using, unfortunately, it had been left undiverted, so it went through to a mobile phone rather than coming through directly to the landline.
Well, I know you're speaking at a conference in Glastonbury, aren't you?
That's right, yes. I'm holding a workshop this weekend to teach people to use the methodologies that I used initially to traverse the frequencies and communicate with those entities on the different frequency levels. And at the end of the weekend, they'll be able to go to the source for their own particular messages as well.
Well, that's why I knew this number was not your home number, and that's why it was a little difficult to get you on. But we got you now. I started telling people a little bit about you, but I wanted you to tell your whole story. I told them that you are an engineer, and, you started out very practical like everybody else, but tell them how you got over into this strange topic that you wrote about, the history of God.
Well, it's very interesting because from a very, very early age, I've always been interested in things metaphysical and things not of this world, specifically UFOs and other entities. In fact, I was seeing and getting a glimpse of the worlds of spirit from a very early age, and I can remember seeing things like the wind, for instance, going over the roof of my next-door neighbour's house, and then realising later, much later, that to be able to have done that, I must have been able to look through the wall of my neighbours, through my own bedroom, and my next door neighbours' walls as well. So I was totally disfocused away from this physical reality. And I also used to do quite a lot of astral travelling as well. And the environment when you're astral travelling is a completely different environment than what it is when we're in the physical. So I really did a lot of work on myself in my early teens and read a lot of books of the day and did a lot of meditation. And then right towards the end of my teens, I was doing the end of the meditation, I was visited by 4 gentlemen in robes that I can only classify as being my guides or helpers. And they told me that everything I was doing was correct and right, and everything that I was researching into was right. But it wasn't the right time in my current earthly existence, and that I needed to gain some more experience first. So from that date onwards, I really put my metaphysical and spiritual progression onto the back burner. Although I kept one eye open and maintained an interest, it was nowhere near as intense. And it wasn't until 20 years later, after I'd done the things that most people do, which is get married, buy a house, start to rise to the ranks of the managerial structure at work, etc., and gain 2 PhDs, and the result, that's not 2 MScs, the result of it, that I started to get back involved with the spiritual stuff. Specifically when there was a lady who was on a course with me, a college course, said that she was starting to do Reiki, and was I interested? Because we talked about the spiritual, metaphysical subjects during the breaks and things. And so I went and started to learn Reiki with her. And then within 12 months, I was a Reiki master. And very quickly after that, I was seeing an energy healer who was trained by Barbara Brennan. She was one of the first generation students trained by Barbara Brennan. And she said that she was going to organise a workshop that was based upon all of the teachings that Barbara had taught her. And would I be interested in that? So I went along to that. And next thing I knew, I'd signed up to a 4-year commitment to be taught how to use the frequencies that Barbara Brennan uses to heal the human body on the auric levels and the chakra levels and all the other functions that are surrounding the energetic side of the physical body. Now, almost at the same time as this, a friend of mine who was also doing Reiki had moved to Sweden to work for a car company over there. And my wife and I decided to have quite a cheap holiday. So we went over there on holiday, and he had another friend who was a Reiki master who told him that he had to take me to a certain part of the area that he lived, where there was a nice big long river and there was lots of trees and things, and a nice woodland walk. And we went on this walk, and as we were going on this walk, I noticed the energies were getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And I felt a strong and deep desire to sit and meditate on a rock, an outcropping that was nearly close to the shore. I could just jump from the shore, the pathway onto this rock, and I sat there and meditated for probably 3/4 of an hour. And during this time, I received what I can only describe as being the most profound achievement I've ever experienced in my life, where I was reduced to not being able to speak properly. It was so profound. It was absolutely awesome, to be honest. And my wife and this friend had continued to travel on further up the river, and they'd stood on the suspension bridge and watched me. And they both said that they could feel like an alien presence or an energetic presence in the area around me, and that they felt they were rewiring me. And from that point onwards, really, my spiritual faculties just progressed on an exponential basis. And it got to the point where I was working with the energies associated with healing the human aura, and I found I could go well past the frequencies associated with the physical body and the spiritual body, and got to the point where I was being reprimanded by my instructor for going too high. But it just seemed totally and utterly normal to do that. And once I finished the course, I experimented more and more and more. And as I was doing this, I met different entities along the way, and eventually I got as high as I could go at that point in time, and started to have a communication with an entity that later announced itself as the source entity, and that it was what we classify as God. And much later onwards, I managed to communicate with its creator, the origin, which is the overall energetic space, as it were, that is in the Hindu texts all that there is, and it created the source entities. And as long as whilst I was doing this, I was journaling this information. And at some point during, I think it was around 2005, I noticed that it was going to be enough information to start to create a book. So I started, every time I was meditating, I started to journal the information and create the book. And that's become the history of God.
Mm-hmm. So you just kept going up into higher and higher dimensions and levels where it's like no one had ever been before. I remember one time in the book you kept going up there, and you came to one level, and a being there was saying, "What are you doing here? Humans never come up this high." They were very surprised to see you up there.
That's right. That was an entity that initially changed its form factor to something that I should fear as a human being, and it created itself into a dragon type of shape. And I classified it as the dragon entity when I was writing down, journaling the information. And you're absolutely right, Dolores. This was the 27th frequency level, and it was so surprised to see an entity that was essentially from the Earth sphere, the mankind sphere, which is just a low frequency, but it tried to scare me off and used this dragon form which he obviously got from my memory bank, and tried to frighten me off, saying, "You shouldn't be here. You can't be here. You're part of mankind. It's impossible for you to be here. It's too high for you." And then eventually, after I was kept pestering it for information, it decided to give itself a different form factor, and told me its name was Byron, which is something that I used to call it and communicate with.
I know you said he was trying to scare you out of there. That's why he appeared as a dragon. But then you kept going higher, but eventually you said you found out you didn't have to go level by level by level. You could just jump to the level that you wanted to go to.
Yes, that was quite an interesting progression for myself, because previously I've been using, and this is what I use on the workshops, by the way, initially, a methodology of moving myself up through the frequencies by I was counting my way up at first, or using a mental visualization by using an elevator and going up that way. And eventually I found out I didn't need to do that. I could just go there. In fact, on one instance, I seem to remember, I thought I'll just go up, and when I stopped myself, I was at the 60th level, and I thought I could only previously go to 27 or 28, and that was hard. But when I was trying to go to 29, I pushed that hard that I just shot well past the next few levels and went up to the 60th, and I felt this was so incredible.
Why they were surprised to see you up there. That's why they were surprised to see you up there, because you don't usually get to go to those levels. But that's where all the information was coming through, and that's what we call it the history of God, because you began to ask all these questions. You're like me, you're curious, and you wanted to know all the questions about God and the source and how he was created and how he was formed. So you got a tremendous amount of information. Then you wanted to know about the earth and all that kind of creation. So you asked a lot of the questions that I would have asked, too, in getting this information. And that's why you were able to come back and remember it and record it.
Yes, and it's. I was also given a gift of memory retention in that respect as well, because as I was coming back into from meditative state, and then going away and literally, typing it up, sometimes a couple of hours later, it came back in total clarity. So I'm fairly sure that the gift that I was given by the source entity was there to make sure that I could bring the information back to mankind, and they would, and as a result of that, I could give the best dialogue that I've received at that point in time back in the written word. And as you find out, Dolores, it's extremely important to ask the right questions.
Definitely.
Because if you don't ask the right questions, you don't get the proper answers and the diversity of answer in terms of understanding the greater reality.
Yeah, that's what I'm always telling in my classes, in my work with the hypnosis methods. You must ask lots and lots of questions, go over and around it and under it. And if you don't ask the right questions, you're not going to get the answers. And that it's the way it's worded, too. You have to learn to ask the correct questions. And that's why I think that is, we've said questioning becomes an art. to where you know how to do it after a while. You're not going to get the information just sitting there. They're not going to just dump it on you.
That's true. And also, they have to make sure that you're capable of understanding the information that you receive when you ask the question. And that's an interesting statement to make there, because one of the things I've noticed throughout my life, and even before I started to do this work, was that I felt that I've been living 3 lives concurrently, because of the amount of different things that I was doing in life, in terms of the jobs I was doing, the pastimes I was doing, the education I was doing. I ended up with a large library, a large vocabulary of images, experiences, understandings that's allowed the entities I've been in contact with, and the source entity and the origin, to be able to give me quite complicated information about the multiverse and how it's constructed, and be able to bring that back and present it in a way which is understandable to mankind as well.
Well, there's an interesting story that one of my students told after they take the class, and, they read all of my books. They just think that the information just comes automatically. Well, they had a good client, and they were starting to experiment with what I've taught them. And they said they got to this part where I get the information from, and they were sitting there. They had a lot of people in the room, and they said, all right, what do you want to tell us? And what I call it the subconscious, it's the higher self, said, what is your question? And they said, well, what do you want to tell us? And they kept saying, what is your question? And they couldn't think of any, because they had not come prepared to ask questions. And after a couple of times of that, they said they're sitting there with egg on their face, is the expression we use, thinking, I didn't know I was supposed to be prepared by asking questions. Finally, the higher self said, go and prepare your questions and then come back. So that's a good example, because, here you're working with something that has all knowledge, everything that can possibly be learned, and we don't have any idea of how far it goes. Do you think they're going to just dump all of that information on you at once? It's impossible. They want to know, what specifically do you want to know about, and narrow it down. So I guess people thought that was the way I got the information. You just open the door and they just start dumping on you. But you found out the same thing. You just have to ask the questions. Then they know what stage of development you are, what you can handle, and what you really want to focus on. So I think that was a good example.
Absolutely. And it's quite an interesting analogy, is that when we are communicating with these entities, and some of them are really quite highly evolved entities, that we are only as good as our questioning. And I try, when I'm teaching people the problem with communicating with these entities who are able to communicate and understand things on an instantaneous basis, that if you're reading or you're channeling or you're acting as a medium for somebody or yourself, then you've got to be smarter than the average search engine, like using Google or Yahoo, because if you only put 2 or 3 keywords in there, you're only going to get the information based on those 2 or 3 keywords back.
Well, I know, even going back and looking at my earlier books, the questions I asked, the things I wanted to know, seem very simple now, but that was where I was at that time. And then you just get, I always say, they feed you little spoonfuls. Then you digest 1 spoonful, you get another spoonful. They're never going to give you more than you can handle. The few crumbs at a time, they're not going to give you the whole loaf of bread. And that's why what I'm getting now, I could never have understood 30 years ago when I started out with all of this. So we can see our point of development. I think maybe now in your second book, you can look back at what you were asking at the beginning of your first taking your baby steps, really. Can't you see the difference, can't you?
Well, it's really really quite incredible you said that, because I was thinking about exactly the same thing. When I look at the information in Beyond the Source and the detail and the depth that's come out of it from the different areas of the multiverses that were created by the Source entity's peers or the co-creators, and I look at that compared to the history of God, it's a significant step difference. And I was telling Julia when I was reading the galley print of Beyond the Source, book 1, I was looking at the content and the detail, and it suddenly struck me that I was within 2 or 3 months of finishing book 2 then, which I've just finished 2 weeks ago, and I thought, wow, I've moved beyond this as well significantly, and it's a case of as you grow and you expand yourself and become more expansive and receive more information, therefore you're able to take on more information next time, and more diverse information and more detailed information and more complicated information. So every time we progress, it's almost as if the bigger picture becomes clearer every time, and therefore we can see more detail every time.
Mm-hmm. Because that's what I found with mine. When I wrote the first book of my Convoluted Universe series, I thought it was a real mind bender, going beyond anything else I'd ever written. But now it seems rather simple after I've done 4 of those books. Each book got a little more complicated, a different kind of a concept brought in, a different kind of a theory. So each book became a little more complicated as it goes along. So you have to adapt to it. It is an evolving, living thing that you have to adapt to it in order to work with it. So I think we've said this, we're following the same kind of a path, different information, but you can see it evolves as you go along.
Mm. And it's important that that it is the same path, and it's important that it is different information, because we have different ways of doing it. Yours is an extremely successful but extremely diverse way of doing it. But nevertheless, the information is entirely accurate and appropriate. But it's if we were, for instance, if we just put the 2 of us on Earth, and I landed in the UK as I am now, and you landed in the US as you are now, you would pick up different information about the Earth by being in the US, whereas in being in the UK, I'd pick up different things about the Earth by being in the UK. And if we scale that outwards towards the universe and then the multiverse, and all the frequencies and dimensions and subdimensional components and other energies that are there that construct it, then we can see how, although we're picking up information which is new information and detailed information, in terms of what's out there, it's not even scratching the surface.
Yeah. Because I remember when I was first beginning my work, I've been doing it 45 years, but back in the beginning, when I first heard the term universes, it really blew me away, because all we were knowing was this universe we live in now. They said, you mean there's more than one universe? And of course, that's what a lot of people believe now, but that was one of the first eye-openers, I guess you would say, with me, to think there was more than one universe.
Absolutely. And it's what I'm starting to understand now is, as I get more and more experienced in receiving the information and putting the information into the correct way of presenting it whilst not losing any of the detail, is that mankind, when it thinks about dimensions and energies, is focused upon what the information that it's received in the past and has been able to work with. And as I stand back now, I'm realising that we talk about dimensions, there's 3 dimensions in the physical universe, and then there's more dimensions on top of that. And I'm starting to realise that the information I've been picking up is showing a bigger picture, and that what we're actually looking at aren't full dimensions, they're subdimensional components. And each of those subdimensional components are inflated by 12 frequency bands, and that each frequency band, once you get above the physical universe, equals another universe in its own right, a simultaneous universe in its own right, and these are all part of a full dimension, which again all increase in in their frequential delicateness, as it were, as they get further and further up the frequencies and dimensions and subdimensional components and get closer and closer back towards the source. And in Beyond the Source book too, I've picked up that there's other structures as well to do with the materials that make up the dimensions and frequencies. And when we talk about parallel universes, that's a completely different angle as well, because that involves event space and how we affect that which is surrounding us, and how we affect that which is surrounding others as well, not only in our local areas in terms of our own physical bodies, but also that which is around us from a global perspective, and then from a universal perspective. And to include all that as well, it truly is mind-blowing sometimes. I sometimes sit back and try to rationalise what I've received and think, we're only getting small parts of this, and the detail is getting more and more clearer, and it does take. We do have to have it we do have to take it like baby food, bit by bit, and then eventually we're able to eat the real food, the grown-ups' food. I think we're getting there. We are getting there.
Yeah, that's always the example I use. But correct me if I'm wrong, but when you started out, this was the source entity, and then in that book it describes how there were 12 source entities created, and ours was only one of those. And that's why you began to want to contact the other source entities. This would be saying there are other gods over other parts, but you wanted to contact them and find out what were those universes like that those source entities had control of, I guess you would say. Is that a pretty good assumption of what you were doing?
Yes, exactly. In fact, slightly before then, I had a communication with the origin, the absolute, and
the origin was first, and then that led you to the source, the source entity.
Yeah, that's right. And the origin had told me a little bit about its. Should I say the source entity had told me a little bit about the origin's history, where it had created or tried to recreate 12 versions of itself to accelerate its own evolution and its evolutionary content, because it's only self-aware of a minute fraction of 1% of its totality. And it tried to recreate 12 versions of itself, which I've only just found out it would have been impossible, because how can the absolute recreate the absolute within the absolute? It doesn't work. So it had to create 12 source entities that were within its own sphere of self-awareness, as it were, that were quite clearly lesser entities than itself, but nevertheless were big enough and large enough to gain their own sentience within their own time. And then when they gained their own sentience within their own time, they were given, they were educated as to what they were and what their reason for existence was. And that basically their role was to go out and experience and learn from those experiences and evolve as a result of that, and pass that evolutionary content back to the origin, so that it as well could evolve off the back of the information that was created through the evolutionary content of the source entities. And the source entities were told to basically just go out there and do it. There's no rules. You can do whatever you want to do as long as you experience, learn, and evolve. And our particular source entity decided to create a multiverse and populate it with billions upon trillions of smaller versions of its smaller entities who were also there to experience the fine, minute detail of that multiverse. And it was during this time that I thought, well, I've got to move out and look at some of the information from these other source entities to understand what they'd done to accelerate the origin's evolutionary content. What were they doing? What multiverses have they created? What entities have they created? Do they exist in universes? Did they exist in dimensions? Did they exist in some other form of universal multiversal construct? How did those how did those entities work with that? Were they as constrained as ourselves, or were they completely free form and totally energetic or thought based? And I found it really compelling to go out there and seek information from the co-creators, if you want to call them that, the gods' peers, and bring that information back and pass it on to mankind for its own evolutionary progression.
Well, that's why, to me, it shows there's so much more to this than anyone could even begin to imagine. And you set out then to contact each one of these source entities, and they each had their own universe, which operated on different rules, and then the other universes. And some of it just became more and more complicated, that it's beyond the range of the average mind to understand. But the first book, Beyond the Source, you went through 6 of these, and they even warned you to take it easy because, this stuff can be mind-blowing, to digest it and go slow. But at first I wanted to put it all into one book, but they said, no, separate it out so people can have time to digest it. And in this last year, you said you were working on the second book for the last 6 of the source entities. And I said, yes, if your mind holds out, because it's so complicated. The concepts are beyond anything I've ever heard before. I didn't know if your mind could take all of that. But you said, now you finished the book too.
I have to. There were moments, Dolores. I have to say, there were moments when I was wondering whether I was going to stay in one piece, and there has been considerable bags under the eyes and headaches. But it's interesting that the further and further I went out, it was like a stepping stone. Each source entity was a stepping stone. Now, our own source entity, our own God, sort of held my hand, as it were, energetically, the further out I went, to sort of help me make the transition in working with the frequencies that were associated with those other source entities. And as I went further and further out, the information got more diverse. The interface between the source entities was different, totally different each time. And the difficulty within the first series of dialogues was a different experience as well. But when I eventually got past Source Entity 6 and started to work on the second book and was talking to Source Entity 7, things started to change in a more profound way, because the information in book 2, and by the way, I shall be bringing the manuscript to the Transformation Conference, Dolores, so I shall be personally handing it over. But the information in book 2 started to change dramatically. The detail and the content was, it was a level of difficulty 2 or 3 times removed from beyond the source book 1. So it's almost as if I'd made a leap and I got to the other side, and I was able to work with more detail. And in fact, there comes to a point when I'm no longer in need of the helping hand of Source Entity 1, as I called our Source Entity, and I was able to make the journeys between the other source entities on my own. And then right towards the end of that, I noticed that I was starting to communicate with 2 or 3 of them in parallel, and that was really confusing at first, and I had to be very careful what I was doing so I didn't get them mixed up. But it was that was an interesting scenario right towards the end.
But I think all of them were indicating that no one has ever gone this far before. Wasn't that what they said when they were doing this? They weren't even sure if you could do it.
It's a completely new thing for a human being to have gone beyond God, and it's not. Well, I think it's very new. Certainly from a Western world perspective, where we're using our own meditative techniques and to move out there. I do think that there may have been a number of very, very advanced yogis who may have been able to have done it in India, I suppose, in a number of centuries ago. But in terms of mankind actually being there by desire, I think that I'm probably the first person to do it because the information is so, let's say, incredibly different to what's previously been picked up. That's
it's real mind-bending. What I was following and mind-bending. Yes, a lot of these yogas and hermits, they go live in a cave all their life, and they probably get information through contemplation, meditation, but they don't bring it back and write about it. They just hold it in maybe a few, what do you want to call it, proteges or followers might know it, but it's never passed on to the general public. It's more or less held as sacred knowledge and secret knowledge so that it's not passed on. But that's why I think you're the first one to have gotten it and put it out there for the people. That's important.
Absolutely, and it's a real, well, it's a real honour to be able to do this and pass it on to mankind, and not only that, to teach those seekers of truth who are willing to go through the rigour that I went through personally to be able to do this, certainly within our own multiverse. But it's really humbling to think that I'm the first human being so far to have gone past and written about going past that which is our God and experienced the other multiverse and entities that are the creations of God's peers. It's really humbling, Dolores. I'll never stop thinking about how humble I should be with this information and how I should be very pleased of the ability to help mankind and mankind's ascension by being in these environments, talking to these seriously senior entities, and bring it back to Earth in a way that mankind can understand it, even if it is complicated.
Did they say that this was the time? It was time for people to know now, or as to why this is happening, or you were just an oddity and they're just going to work with you?
Well, I'm starting to understand, Julia, that although I'm currently aligned to our source entity, that my energetic heritage is not of this source entity, although I'm working with it. And they've allowed me to believe certain things at first, because knowing the full truth would have probably blown my mind a bit, to be honest. The ability to move out past that which is our God is a result of certain energetic heritage, and is a result of probably not quite being of the same energy that our God is, if you want to call it that, our source entity is. And as a result of that, I've found it compelling, and to be honest, although it stretched me a number of times to the point of elastic limit, and then I've come out the other side and gained extra elastic limit, I've never quite felt that I was totally and utterly unable to do what I was doing. I've always been stretched and felt the pain of it, but never quite crashed and burned, although I felt like I might have done it once or twice. I've never actually got to that point. And I think it's probably because of that I've been allowed and singled out to continue to do the work.
Right, but as far as like humanity, I mean, for you to, because usually they say it's made available when people are ready. So did they ever come out and say, yeah, people are ready for this? Or
now's the time?
Or was it just because you were able to do that, then it's like, well, I guess we better give him what he wants. But we know that information doesn't come through unless people are ready for it. But, I just wondered if they ever said anything.
Yes, actually, very, very strange. I was just leafing through the back pages of the Beyond the Source before I dialed in, and right at the very end, Source Entity 1, our Source Entity, said it's important to get this information out now, and it clearly is the right time. And if we look around ourselves and look at what's going on around us from an Earth perspective, there's that many people starting to awaken now. There's that many people being in contact with spiritual entities and starting to become aware of the greater reality. that they no longer need the sort of baby food version of spirituality now. That they can understand that pretty much straight away. It's the finer detail and the greater detail that they're now seeking. So it's almost as if Earth is ready to make a big move, or is ready to accelerate the ascension process, and allow it to access that information which is available when we are when we are exposed to higher frequencies. And I firmly believe that the information that Source Entity 1 told me when it said, this needs to get out there now, is a temporal issue. It's the right time and from the right area to give the information, because it's going to satisfy the hunger of those who are becoming awake and who have progressed beyond the basic spiritual information that we've been receiving in the past. They need to have more information to satisfy them and to educate them, to continue to assist this acceleration. Yeah.
They want to surpass the basic metaphysical information too, because they do know there's more out there. But I also think a lot of this is going to challenge the churches. Well, we already know we've gone past that. But it's hard enough for people to accept God, and now we're putting out that there are many gods over different other universes. It's not just the one and only. Some of these ideas are going to shake a lot of people's religious faiths and make them look at things differently too.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely right. In fact, it's quite interesting that the host of a workshop I'm going to be doing in Detroit after the Transformation Conference was quite worried about how this would work, how the workshops would work with people who are of certain religions. And I wrote quite a simplified piece of text back to him that he could use in the advertisement, and effectively said, this is beyond religion. This is what religion tried to explain thousands of years ago, but lost its way. But it doesn't matter whether you're a Hindu, doesn't matter whether you're a Christian, doesn't matter whether you're an Islam follower. This would work with any religion. It is purely scientific in application, and therefore transcends the need to have a belief system there. And as a result of that, you're absolutely right, Dolores. I think there's going to be a number of individuals, a number of churches who are going to rebel against it, because it's going to be giving information about the greater reality that they think they should have, and will be probably trying to put the brakes on a little bit. But they won't be able to stop it, because the inertia is going to be too strong.
It's also going to change some beliefs about physics, quantum physics, because I've already heard from people who have read my books and say it's changing their beliefs, the ones who are into physics. So yours is even going to blow it even further. But it gives them another way of looking at that also. So I think it's time to have people's foundations shaken up a little bit.
Well, that's what the Ascension's about. Did they talk specifically? I'm thinking there was something said in there. Well, this would be Source Entity. It was number 1, right? Our Source Entity.
Yeah.
That's the number I've given it, purely because it's the first Source Entity I was in contact with. Yeah. Okay,
so Source Entity 1. I mean, the fact that we are going through this process and waking up and ascending. How does Source Entity see that? I mean, was that planned? I mean, how was that viewed?
Our ascension, you mean changing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people,
Well, in essence, if we go back to the history of God, there's a chapter in there where it talks about how the entity that we call the devil, Lucifer, had predicted when they were creating the physical form to allow energetic entities to experience the lower frequencies in this particular universe, and the human body was being created and designed and developed. And it used the higher function of the Akashic records to establish what the potential was of entities being given total free will and incarnating in lower frequencies and just let them get on with it and doing it on their own, and not guiding them. And the one scenario was that we would surpass all expectations and rise up through so many frequencies that it would be, without doubt, the best thing that any experiment could have done in terms of understanding and experiencing, learning and evolving. But the other side of it was we could actually do the opposite and go right down to the lowest frequencies possible and really, make a mess of it, really. And in essence, that's what's happened. We've gone right down the bottom of the frequencies. But what's happening now is we're coming out the other side.
We are an experiment, and they say it's a great experiment, to see if it's going to work. Okay, well, Guy, we're coming up on the time here. I do want to tell people you're going to be at our conference in a few weeks. We're bringing you over from England, 2 weeks now. We're bringing you over from England, and it's the 7th Transformation Conference in Rogers, Arkansas, July 13th to the 15th. But also, Julie knows the dates when we're going to give the Transformation Conference in England.
Oh, that one's the August 31st to September 2nd. Also, we want to mention you're doing your workshops after the conference as well.
Yeah.
You want to do a brief description of that, or what that's going to be about, Guy?
It was right after the conference. He's going to be staying for a few days giving workshops. Tell him what that's going to be.
Yeah, there's 2 days. Basically, on the first day I teach people more detail about the structure of the multiverse, so they can understand what they're doing when they're doing it, so they know where they're going to. And I'll then go through a series of basic techniques to give people physical proof that they are in fact moving themselves up the frequencies, because when we work with the basics, we have to show people how if they activate their chakras, then they can activate one of the auric levels associated with that chakra, and that's also associated with a frequency level. And by doing these basic techniques, people can feel the auric layer of a person that they're working with, and they can actually feel that there is a difference in that person in terms of their frequency, and the person who's activated their auric levels can also feel the intrusion of somebody trying to feel their auric level. So we give them physical proof that they are in fact raising their frequencies and moving up the frequencies. And then we go through a series of exercises, repetitive exercises in different ways, but using the same thought process, the same mental exercises to get them up to the 14th frequency level, which takes us into the next full dimension. And the 13th and 14th frequency levels are what I've recently found out are the 2 areas that are being reserved for our ascension when we move into the next dimension. And then the second day, we review what we've done and experiences, which we do over the first day anyway, and then we move through a more accelerated methodology of getting up to these different frequencies, where we start to move away from needing the very basic methodology and start to use techniques where we can go there by almost instantaneous methods, but by progressing in a slow pace that allows people to keep up with the teaching, but whilst also experiencing the different environments associated with some of the higher frequencies. And then, so on the second day, they will have been able to have gone up to the 100th level, level 3, which needs another 6 months, at least 100 hours of personal practice, results in the individual going right up towards the source entity and being able to move to any level just by thinking about it, rather than going through a mental visualization process. But we'll be doing level 1 and level 2, which will be very hard work energetically, and people end up being very, very tired at the end of the at the end of the workshop.
Well,
but they do well. They always do well.
Yeah. This will give them an idea of what they can expect. But you'll be lecturing at the conference, and then right afterwards you'll have 2 days of workshops. And then we all go to England. We're going the end of July. And we're having the first Transformation Conference in London, and you said that's in August.
At the very end of August, 1st of September, and it's in London, and Guy will be a speaker there as well.
Yeah, he'll be there. We'll be back on his home turf then. And then in October, we're going to be over there for 3 months and doing classes all over Europe. But then at the very end, we end up in Rome, and then we go on a 11-day cruise of the Mediterranean, and Guy is going to be on that also because we're going to be having workshops on this cruise as we go all over the Mediterranean. So there's going to be a lot dealing with Guy. Before we sign off, tell them how they can contact you if they want to write you.
Yeah, very quickly, Guy, because they're going to pull the plug.
Okay, they visit my website, www.guystephenneedler.com, and that's all one word, and Stephen's got a V. There's a page on there that shows an email address to get directly to me, and the email address is thehistoryofgod@btinternet.com, and I'm happy to answer any questions that they come across, and people do contact me on a regular basis.
Wonderful.
And the books are available on our website. The book is The History of God, and the second book is Beyond the Source, and that's coming out right now.
Yeah, it's already out.
It just now came out. Okay, so we're going to have to go because are going to pull the plug. So thanks, Guy, for keep staying up with us. Now you can go to bed for there. And
thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning in tonight. It was nice to speak to everyone.
I want to shout out to Vitaly at the UK office.
Okay.
I promised him I'd say something.
Okay. So good night, everyone, and thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed the show, check out more of our other videos and be sure to subscribe and click the like button. Thank you for listening to the Metaphysical Hour with Dolores Cannon.